Thank you, everyone, for joining us. This is our another in our series of webinars that we've been doing since March of 2020, and this one is the another one of our in a sub series that we've been doing about Ray Studio 3 analysis functions. The ever since we went production with the software, we have been doing each of the different tabs, each of the different main functions we've been having a webinar on, going through all of the the icons and the settings menus, and then working a few examples and showing some of the different power of it. And we've been inviting in folks to join us to do that. And today we've got James Colborn from jamescolborn.com around on YouTube, racer, the motorsports enthusiast, all of the different things. The voice of the AIM Academy. Lots of folks watch his webinars, and I enjoy them as well. James, thanks for joining us again for what I think is your 11th time you come here and co-hosted with us.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here, and today's topic is one of my favorites. It's strange that it's one of my favorites, but it is one of the most functional tools that has got a lot better in Ray Studio 3 analysis. So I'm excited to be able to talk about it.
When we were thinking about when we started to do these 7 or 8 functionality type webinars, I remember I reached out to you on any of these that you specifically wanted, and boom, it was the top of your list that you wanted to do. And I know you like to use this function quite a bit, and make it work well for you. So it's great to have you here doing this one. So let's talk a little bit, as we have with every one of these. We have opened them up with just a couple of slides that show what the icons are in Ray Studio 2. The one we're going to talk about today, Ray Studio 3 analysis. The one we're going to talk about today is this icon here. And when we blow them up, this is all the different icons, and it's the show the split times report. And one of the things you may notice here, if you haven't updated to the latest version of Ray Studio 3, there is one new icon in this that is fairly new compared to all the beta stuff that we did and all of the times coming up to this, all the webinars we've done here. There now is another icon here for add or show a custom layout. It was in beta for a while, and some of you probably had used it there, but when you went to production, I know there was a few folks that were telling me that they really wanted to only not move to production until they had this add or show a custom layout icon. So it is there now for you in production. If you did an XY plot and you wanted to have another function that you could just totally build your own, you now have an icon to do that. So there it is. But today we're going to focus on show the split times report. And under the show the split times report, and we briefly go over these when we start here, and then James will kind of go over the different icons and show some of the different things that the icons do inside the live software when we go there in just a moment. But when you open up a split times report, you get a series of icons across the top of that specific function, and here they are, right? So we're not going to go through these totally, but you have these, and I give you a slide here in case you want to look back on it. You can see these same tags, by the way, when I've captured them here. If you just hover over and pause your mouse over the top of any of these buttons, you'll get these little tags that pop up. And so all I've done is captured them and put them here to make it a little easier for you to see. So that will be good. The got a couple of, and by the way, and we'll see it when we jump in a little bit deeper. In the brand new version, I think it's 17 that I think that we're going to be using today. When you hover over these buttons, and Emiliano I think mentioned it a couple of weeks ago that it was coming, but now if you click on some of these icons, it's not just a toggle, but it actually brings up a little sub menu that you can pick from to pick if you want to turn on the colorization. Do you want it to be the histogram type? The old Ray Studio 2 type analysis. You're actually getting some choices, and we'll show that when we jump into the live data here in a moment. So that's another slight difference in what we've had in the past. So what I thought I would do is kind of turn it over. We'll leave the presentation here on my screen, but turn it over to James to chat a little bit about just some opening slides, 3 or 4 slides here, to kind of get us into what is a split times report? What is some of the different things about it? Chat a little bit about what he likes about it and what works well for him, and then we will bail out and go into live data, share James's screen and learn a little bit about how he uses this feature. So James, I'll forward the slides obviously, but if you can talk about this slide a little bit, and then we'll move on.
Yeah, absolutely. So split times report, it's one of those tools that is universally applicable to any device that anyone has from AIM, which is brilliant. So you can measure data from a Solo 2 all the way through to some of the most advanced AIM setups that exist, which is one of the I think one of the sort of the best factors with some of the analysis and some of the reports. So we're actually going to be looking at sim racing data today. We've gone through all sorts of different types, but today we're going to look at sim racing data. So the concept is it allows you to be able to analyze details for each and every split that you've created for either your track, and then look at the subsequent laps. And so one of the things that I love is that we used to be able to, download this data, put in Excel, put on some conditional formatting, and be able to see all sorts of sort of consistency. But so much of that has been now sort of added into the split times report. Now, the primary number one use that I've used the split times report for is one of motivation. We always think about, well, why do you download your data and why do you use certain tools? But this is one of those areas that the primary use that I have is motivation to be able to see what could I have done if I was a consistent driver. And I did the best segment that I did in every particular split, and what would my best theoretical lap time be? But then slowly over time, I started to sort of advance my appreciation for this and started to get into some sort of key aspects in terms of, well, the key aspect is also not necessarily just looking at what would you have done if you put together your best lap and your best segments, but also what would you have done in relation to consistency. And so we're going to look at that today as we go forward. And the most important thing I think to be able to focus on here, and I picked this particular view that's on screen here, is that it's already starting to demonstrate some of the more advanced features of Race Studio Analysis 3 versus what you used to be able to get in Race Studio 2 Analysis, which is the nice way of being able to sort of start looking at those major purposes while you're going to use this. And I think that for me, understanding my motivations as to why I use this report, hopefully passing on to you, will help identify what we use going forward. So this is the first slide we have here. Now the next slide.
Let me make sure everybody understands a couple of I'll bring it up, but I think this is a couple things. Number one, this presentation is available. A couple things I normally start with. This presentation is available for download. If you're watching live, Brick has linked that into the chat box. If you're watching this later on YouTube, everything that I talk about or James talks about is being available to be linked. It has been linked in the chat box or something like that. Will be down in the description for this YouTube video. So everything, the things we're going to link in there that I know of so far is, of course, the presentation as a PDF, the racing data, the sim racing data that James has done. It's kind of a cool integration here of showing there is power obviously in your own data, but sim racing data and how it is exactly the same as data you may have gathered on your own track. So that data is available, and there'll be a link to that. The user profiles that James is going to use and build will be available as a link. And James. If I go back one slide, you'll see it a little bit. James is in Europe. He talks about this quite a bit. And over there, they like to name their straights and their corners. And where here in the States, we do a little bit of that, certainly, but a lot of just, corner numbers. And James has done that for this particular track. And that map segment file he has saved and sent over to me. And that has been is placed out on the server for download as well if you want to grab this particular track and have those map segments. So just wanted to make sure everybody knew that. If we talk about chats, links in the chats, they're available for those of you watching this later on YouTube as well. So thank you, James, for that. And the next thing is track management, just a little bit about what I just chatted about.
Yeah, absolutely. So thanks, Roger. And it's I love being here, love being able to share this data. The reason we're using Spa is that I'm actually planning on racing Spa later this year,
very cool.
which is exciting. It's one of those sort of tracks that, as a sort of a club racer, sometimes you get the opportunity of being able to go to the tracks that are on your bucket list. And so I have been once before, but can't wait to get back.
For
Hopefully
those of
this
us in
time
the
it will be
States, how
dark.
far is Spa away from you in London? About.
So if we can drive our car, put the car on the train goes under the tunnel over to France and continental Europe. So probably 4 or 5 hours
Okay.
of a drive. But interestingly, Spa and the Nürburgring are only about an hour apart as well. So
very
that's
cool.
something that people don't know. But it's a lovely part of the
Did not know.
world, and it's a quite spectacular track. And it's let me put it into sort of more information as relates to this, because I could sort of go on forever about how much I love going to places like Spa and everything like that. The key component that we need to think about here is the splits are really determined by you, the user, and by how you want to be able to break the track up into different particular areas. What I've got here is the view that you'd use in Race Studio Analysis 3, the track split sequences, but basically this is your track management capability that you can create different segments. Now, one of the things that we used to have in Race Studio 2 Analysis is that you would have to build a map, and that map would be defaulted unless you changed it to a scenario where right-hand turns were in blue, straights were in green, and left-hand turns were in red. And the track would be automatically broken down into those sort of components. But Spa is quite a long track. I don't know how long it is exactly, but I think it's over 3 miles in terms of length. And so you do get an awful lot of segments if you use the default. Now, one of the things you'll also notice on this particular screen is it says Spa RS3 splits. And so the system will now automatically generate, as long as you've got GPS data for that particular track, rights and lefts and everything there. And I appreciate, thanks, Roger, for that's exactly right. But what I did, just for the purposes of being able to analyze key areas, which I've broken down into very important parts of the track overall, is to be able to simplify those segments, which we're going to look at today. So a very important part of a split times report is setting up your track splits ahead of time, because, in many instances, how you set these up will determine what kind of analysis you want to do. Similarly, going the other way, if you want to be able to analyze different things, you'd set up a different track map. And I'll give you a great example that we all use all the time, or we all are privy to or exposed to, which is if we watch Formula One, we get Sector 1, Sector 2, Sector 3. And if I'm racing at Silverstone, for example, and I'm doing a large tournament and I get the reporting that comes down from the overall session, that's broken down into 3 segments. And so one of the options I would have is that I could break that down and map it into the segments that I'd use, so that I could compare my performance with other drivers if I wanted to be able to see what they'd done and what my sector times were. Similarly, what I've done here is I've broken it down into sectors that I really want to focus on, because these will all have a bearing and an impact in terms of analysis and viewing. So I think that's really important. If you don't do this or aren't comfortable doing this, this is one of the most important things, in my view, to get right in every aspect of Race Studio Analysis 3. It isn't just for split times reports, but everything that you do, with the new software is in large part facilitated by having a very good series of split sequences or track maps. And so whether that's your Roger.
Boy, I agree. The programmers, Emiliano is here with us a lot, and they have really spent a lot of time and are now focusing on, if you have old track maps loaded on your machine when you bring them in, there can be even problems sometimes. So make sure you keep the track maps, number one, updated, allow AIM to do it. And then your segments, I agree with you. The building of these segments will just make the entire process better for you. It will make it much more personalized. When the RS3 splits is created, that is done nothing more than on when a lateral G change, and that is it. And if you got a long track, like you say, 3 miles here, or some tracks that are even longer, the number of splits can get out of hand, right? And so it's often we want to shorten those up. Building your own is really important. The Kyle had a question right in this exact same area. Is there a difference between setting split segments on the map, and we're talking about versus moving header and time distance screen to manage the segments. Frankly, Kyle, that's the best way to do it. Is go ahead and just go to your time distance graph, drag those back and forth, rename them right there. That is the best way to create these track maps that James is talking about. The segments that we're showing here now on the screen. So I think that's true. And then Jeff, and James, you can add into that in a second if you wish. Jeff then goes on to ask another really good question about this specific topic. Will AIM start shipping better splits as add-ons? I have specifically talked to them about that. They're hesitant to do that because what is a good split for a to keep this in James's terms, a Formula Ford and its speed and its cornering ability versus a production sedan or a P2 car. They feel that the splits will be in different spots. I don't think that's necessarily all that true. So we'll keep talking about that and maybe have a place. Maybe there will be a place we can do something on the web server for Ray Studio 3 where people can add their splits and have them be imported in very quickly for some of the main tracks, something like that. What are your thoughts on that, James?
Yeah, I totally agree. Well, there's a word of caution, which a very serious word of caution. When you build these splits, my recommendation or word of caution is do not change the default splits on the header adjustment until you've created a second view. Here you can see I've got SPA RS3 splits, and then underneath key corner analysis and then segment analysis. What I've done is that I've let Ray Studio 3 analysis create the splits, and then I have cloned those and created a sort of carbon copy of those, and then I've adjusted them. The reason that I say this is that if you adjust the SPA RS3 splits, it's very difficult sometimes to go back to those original ones that the AIM server set up in the first place. And so it's just like having a sort of like a default or a fail-safe to be able to go back to if you just want to go back to rights and lefts and as Roger says, sort of change.
Yeah,
now, the other thing that was,
Kyle asked that question just now as well. If you use the header to manage, is there a better way to save? And James just mentioned, and James, please go into when we go into the live data, maybe go in there and show that you clone it first and then you make your changes, and then that'll take care of that problem.
Yep, will do. And then the other question about the splits, I think that's a wonderful idea in terms of sharing splits. One of the things that I generally tend to do is that if I'm using iRacing will allow you to find, and I've got a video on my it's a riveting video, by the way, I might add, on my channel that talks about the fact that you can find the feet for each of the segments that iRacing creates. And then you can split your segment here to map what iRacing creates, so you can then start to analyze the segments that are created in the software of iRacing with the segments that you look at in temperature analysis. Now, those never change regardless of your car. So even there, that would be a lovely scenario if we're analyzing sim data to have a library of being able to say, well, I'm at Spa, I'm at Silverstone, I'm at Brands Hatch, and then just be able to load them. So I think there's a lot of opportunity there, and I think it's a wonderful idea.
And is that the Formula One style 3 split method?
It varies depending where it is. If it's a small track, it's usually 3 or 4, but if it's Spa, I think it's 7.
Okay.
And so, and what it does is it obviously breaks it down into their own particular definition. But if you want to be able to sort of, okay, I've been analyzing my data in Ray Studio 3 analysis, and I'm now back on iRacing, and I know that for sector 1, I want to be under 20 seconds. It just helps match those up. And so things like that. And so I love that idea. I think it's a really good idea.
Perfect. And I have been working with, probably 4 or 5 people over the last 3 or 4 months, SPA being actually one of them, a bike racing team, motorcycle racing team. They wanted to match the 3 splits, the hard-coded splits that are in the track, where the buried loops are. And what I was able to do is I worked with them. They got me a map of where those were. And then I was zooming around, and often you can even find a trace in the Google Earth imagery of where those splits actually were, and we actually built some track maps that matched those splits for different people in different areas. So I agree with you on that one as well. So the next slide, a little bit of this function adds some pretty cool little graphs and tables. Talk about those a little
absolutely. Bit. And we're going to get in this live demo. I just think it's nice to give you some areas of focus in terms of the differentiation that you get between Ray Studio 2 analysis and Ray Studio 3. Now, one of the things that we've talked about in the past is in the past, I've got fast on the brain. That's just how I am. I'm except for racing. So in many respects, in the past, I've talked about scenarios where, how we learn. Are we visual learners? Do we like seeing numbers? Do we like seeing graphs? Do we like seeing video? And there's lots of different ways of being able to use Ray Studio 3 analysis for how you learn. One of the things that I genuinely like in the new split times report is that there's a graphical analysis. And so you see your table, you can put your conditional formatting. I'm going to show you all of that sort of fun stuff, but you can also overlay the data. So you can see things that you can see consistency in terms of lap time. And this is wonderful consistency. You see how Roger is highlighting on the screen there. One of the things that Roger taught me 10 plus years ago was something that he described as noise, which is if you overlay 10 laps together and they're very wide apart, there's inconsistency and it's a noisy part of the track. And I'm going to show you that as we go through. If the lines are very close together, you're very consistent and that's not noisy, and that's what you want to aim for. And so just by having a few views of this information in the split times report allows you to be able to get a good idea. You can see it with your formatting on the table, but if you hover over that segment, you can also see what your line looks like, or your time or the distance view, to be able to look at that data as well. So I'm going to show you that because it's what I use very quickly to be able to go, that's pretty ugly, or oh, that's fine. And the bits that are fine, you just ignore and you focus on the bits that are ugly, because if you get those consistent, that's where your lap times are going to come from each and every lap that you do. And so that's
almost always consistency equals speed. It's hardly ever consistency equals slow, right? So
right, exactly.
Bruce asks a question here, and it fits in perfectly on this slide. Splits versus segments. I won't talk about the rest of his question, but because he's brought up a point that I do it every single time. You're going to hear it all day today. James has already done it a little bit, but we interchange in AIM software. The word segment and the word split is interchangeable. So when Bruce, you're asking splits versus segments with a question mark, in our world here, that what we're talking about, we fill those two words in all the time. Is that how you feel as well, James?
Totally, and I apologize
no,
for using multiple language in that instance, but it's absolutely right. I think that segment is useful if you're using it to match a segment that is existed in, let's say, iRacing, or using your 3 Formula 1 type example. Splits might be, I've split the track into certain key areas and I'm going to ignore these 10 splits and I'm going to focus on these ones. It could just corners, because I want to be able to see sort of like time to those corners or mid-corner speed or whatever need be. And so it's a very good point, but yeah, I think that they're sort of interchangeable.
They're interchangeable. They are segments, but I always try to match with all of my training. I try to match exactly what AIM uses in there, either the little channel tag things they build and all that different thing, and they call it a split times function. So I've just been following the split times report as far as the wording. So not a big deal. Perfect.
Cool. And so the last box, and Roger, I think you added this one into the sort of the early conversation, so I'll probably hand this one over to you. But the one thing I would say that I've encouraged everyone on all of these seminars and webinars that we've been doing. I now get seminars and webinars interchanged. I'm just lost for words right now. Is curiosity in clicking. Right click somewhere, press a button that looks like a wrench, press a button that looks like a gear icon. This is one of these great areas where you can do that, and it just gives you a different sort of view. So Roger, I know you added this, so I'll probably do this to you.
I only added this because, number one, we've done it in most of our the previous webinars that we've done. Whenever you right click on the split report, there is an additional dialog box that will pop up, and it'll pop up in all of the different functions. And the reason I really wanted to show it this time as much as any is just a little bit different. It gives you the color for best lap and color for fastest rolling lap in both the default dark and light. And that's a little additional function here in the split times. To make it so you don't have to go out to options and change to the big, huge color list. But in the latest version of the Ray Studio 3 software, they have changed the look of this settings box. It's all the same exact things, but they have done it where you don't have to come in and check and uncheck to do different things. They give you what the topic is, and then what do you want it to do. So it's just a little bit of a different look. It's added a little bit of length to it in some cases, but it's all the same exact information, but they've given you a little bit more info and a radio button. So just wanted to show that a little bit so everybody can see the difference there. Okay. And I think that says that we're going to go out and do some live data. James is going to go over some of that same stuff, but in a real world example. So it'll be kind of fun. So James, I'm going to stop my share right now, and you Should be able to share your screen now.
Yep, absolutely. So you should now be able to see my screen.
And it is popping there.
Perfect.
It's
That's
coming.
lovely
It's
stuff.
still coming. There it is. There she popped up. Okay, we're ready to rock and roll. Give us an idea. Do some of the things that we talked about, the basics of where are we at on the screen, what are you doing, the options and the icons. Kind of walk us through the layout, and then jump into what are some of the cool things you do with this function.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is so again, live demo time. This is where it gets exciting. I should get my excuses list out as we try and do every time. This is I have an iRacing driver analysis, which I've got set up here, which allows me to be able to analyze the data how I want to be able to see it. And in three key areas. And I've always talked about the three views that I think are the default that everyone arguably should have if you've got any kind of device. And this is a device that's an AIM device, a sim data file. And those are time distance, which we've got here. Everyone's quite comfortable with that. We're going to get into a little bit of detail in a minute here. It's a track analysis. And one of the things you may notice is that I mentioned the splits we're talking about don't necessarily just empower your split times report, but they power all sorts of other views. And in this instance, you can see I've got the split here called Puon, and you can see that going through that split, I've got different analysis and different lines based on that split that I've created. And then I've got the split times report, which I'll show you in just a minute. But before we get there, I wanted to be able to talk you through some of the things we talked about with the segments. Now, you can see here that I have each of the areas set up for the segments that I've created. These are key corners. One of the things you may notice is, why is this one called straight and this is called straight 2? It's because I don't know, and I don't know if they actually have a name for this straight. They have the camel straight, which comes on after Eau Rouge, that we all know. But I was doing a little bit of analysis earlier on, and I couldn't find one for the second straight. You also notice that this is called straight, this is straight 2. You cannot have two segments of the same name, because then the system gets a bit confused, as would we, because it's like, well, which segment are we looking at here?
Somebody asked, by the way, because they're all racers, what car did you use in this iRacing example?
Yep. So this is the closest thing I can get to a Formula Ford, which is the Skip Barber RT2000.
And the other one asked is, are you flat through Eau Rouge? And my eye went straight down to that line, and I'm sure later in other laps, I'm sure you went flat through there. So it's somebody asked that or mentioned that earlier too.
If I did, this was a few laps. I noticed those comments coming up earlier, and again, it's a bit of an excuse. I haven't got the setup quite right.
There you go. There
should be flat there in a Skip Barber or Formula Ford, I would argue. Okay. It's just a line thing, and excuses will come endlessly, but this was my first session doing it as we started practicing. I mean, if I turn off my blurring, you can see my sim seats right behind me right here today. So I've got all my laps, and you can see, and as per usual, you've got your usual sort of setup here. What I wanted to show you was quickly to go into the track maps that we've created. So if I click here, this was that box that we saw earlier on. And if I click here for the Race Studio 3 splits, you can see that if I zoom in here, the view is very different. I'm not going to load these up because it would change all these. In the essence of time, we want to be able to go into the split report. But if you notice, I've clicked on Spa Race Studio 3 splits here. It shows you exactly what we're talking about, which is, here is the first corner. It's a right-hander, another one here, down here. And you can see it's basically, right, left, right, straight, right, left. I won't go through the entire track. I can figure that out. And so it's basically broken it down. Now, this wasn't as useful for me in terms of analysis, because I wanted to be able to see about the sort of the overall sort of collection of corners together, because they all, as we all know, all corners link together to some degree. Plus, we wanted to be able to work on one very important factor, which is, I'm not going to count these up, but I think there's probably about 15 or so of them, maybe a little bit more. If you're on track, one of the key problems with any split analysis is you do your split analysis and you'll say, wow, I was 17 seconds here and 16 there. Where exactly did that point of the split start? Where did it end? And what split am I in right now? Or segment, depending on where you are. Because at that point, you're trying to break the track down in your head into all these segments as well. Whereas if you simplify it down into key areas, it allows you to be able to tangibly say, I need to be flat through Eau Rouge. you know, my brain said I was, my GoPro said I was, but my data system said it wasn't. And so, you know, that's key. Anyone wonders why I recommend SmartyCam sometimes, is it's very difficult to hear the audible difference between 90% throttle and 100% throttle on a GoPro, but on a SmartyCam, the truth will be revealed. And so there's that. So I'm going to go back because I don't need to change these. But if you notice, I changed the segment view. These are the segments I've created. And so if you want to be able to know how to clone the segment as well, and I said earlier on, never change these, nice to have the default. Click on this gear icon, click on clone the splits. It'll ask you for a new name. So I'll do aim demo. If I click on OK, it will create this new area for us, and it's always in alphabetical order. So it'll create this. If I click there, and then I click on OK, it will ask me, do I want to change all the sessions back to this? I don't, because I'm going to be doing a demo here. But then you can go and start adjusting all of these as you need to, but you've always got your default there to go back to. And that's the word of caution I mentioned earlier. It's always nice to go back to that default that comes from AIM, just in case you just want the baseline to be able to start building from, or you just might like right and left hand turns.
And with track maps being so important to what they do, AIM has built this where you just built this AIM demo, which is ready. It would be ready to go if you attached it, obviously. And there is no save button. So if you went up to those tops of those bars and you were sliding those segments back and forth, don't need to do it. The Kimmel straight, you made it a little longer or a little shorter. It's automatically saving into that whichever one you have loaded. At that point, it would be AIM demo, and so it would be automatically updating that. So it's kind of in some ways that's bad, some ways that's good. It's you change it, it changes it throughout the entire run of Ray Studio 3, every function you went into, and it's very, very powerful. But you gotta always create that, always clone it, and then do it like James says. That's important.
Which I think is it just makes life a little bit easier. But again, this I get excited by this. This is one of my favorite sort of features to be able to, because it just sets everything else up so beautifully for being able to analyze certain key areas. So I'm going to click out of that, and then I'm going to show you the bar across the top here. Now, we talked earlier, time distance I've already got loaded. We've got the track. This is the trio that I love. This is, if anyone's ever sort of, I've talked about, this is my favorite three, works on any device. It's wonderful. You can have the scatter plot or the histogram, and I know that we've done last week, Matt did some work with Roger on the scatter layout that was there, the histogram. But then we get into this button called the split times report. Now, if I click on it, you'll see that it's gone.
Yeah, it did it anyway, didn't it? You can reload
it anyway. So
it did it anyway.
So I'm going to reload my segment analysis.
We get to show it anyway, don't you? Know, a button will come up and say, do you want to load this for the rest of the day? Yes. And okay.
I did. I'm just waiting for a second.
Now it has to, because it's going across the entire Ray Studio 3 program. It's rechanging all of those segments. It should take a second. Maybe just click on the split times report.
There we go.
There it is. There we go.
Yep. So it came across. We have a slight, and this is nice. I'm going to show you a little thing here. There's one slight thing that needs to be adjusted here. And I have a tendency in webinars to do things where I explain to people what I'm actually doing. So let me slow down and do it again. One of the things that people may be wondering is how have I named these? Well, if you right click and you click on rename the split, I know this is the bus stop. So I can click here and it will change the name of the split there. So that's my splits back. Just in case you ever lose them, that's why it's always nice to have these available to you.
That's a known bug that will be fixed in the next version of the software. That last one keeps going from a name back to the number. So that'll be fixed soon.
Which is, it's one of those things. It's like,
known bug.
Big deal. Yep. So then we've gone back and now I've clicked on split times report. And so all the things that I've got here, all of these splits that I've named now appear here on the split time report. And you can see that we're starting to get an idea in terms of the split time through each of those particular areas. And I'm going to go through each of the buttons. But this view right here, right now, ignoring the naming, is very similar to what you would have had in Ray Studio 2 analysis, the older version. But we want to be able to add to this. We want to be able to make this a little bit more sort of 2022. And so we've got a lot of options available to us. Ignore this bit here. This is customized for me right now, but I'll show you how I've done it so you can set it up so it works for you. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click across these buttons that are available here, and I'm going to show you a little bit what's available. Now, the first thing is you'll notice that right now we're just seeing the times by the split. So as I got a little bit quicker with my little skip barber, you can see the times improved as I went through there. We did ignore that one, but we sort of got better and better as we went through. And you can see that the system will effectively colorize the slowest and the fastest, and that's a very similar thing you would have seen in Race Studio 2 analysis going through. Now, you may be wondering, before I've even gone into anything else, what this yellow bar is. And if any of you are familiar with split times reports, this is indicative of your fastest rolling lap, which is what series of segments did you do in combination gave you the fastest lap. But right now, it doesn't tell you what that is. And I'll show you how that comes up later. So it means that the blanchiment and bus stop all the way through to the next period of the second straight, that was my fastest sequence of sectors or segments or splits as per the setup that I created. And that's often useful to be able to know what your actual rolling fastest lap was. There's three types of reality that are here. The fastest lap you actually drove, which is the one that goes down on the lap report. There's the fastest sort of linked sectors that you do, which is how would I have done if I actually did something on track and they moved the start finish point. And then the third is what's my theoretical look like, which is what is the best of each of these combined, which is why many, many people use the split times report. We'll get there as we go forward. So I'm going to click on some of these buttons first to show you what they actually mean. Now, the first one I'm going to do is this sort of little white triangle here. And Roger mentioned it earlier. If you hover over, now you get a nice little description as to what each of these actually does, which makes life just that little bit easier for us doing the demonstrations, because there's so many buttons that I have tended to forget sometimes what they do. But generally speaking, there is one here, this custom layout, which I'm intrigued to play with, but I haven't done much with it yet. And so
you're not allowed to today. So no.
But not today, exactly. So the first thing I'm going to do is click here. And the second thing is you now get this drop down and you get hide distance or show distance. And you can see that the graphic icon actually fills up and looks like a ruler. And so I'm trying to think, I lived in the US for years. I think it's called a ruler in the US as well.
It is.
But in effect, there are things with slightly different names. It's like spanner and wrench,
exactly.
Different names. But so if I click here, it's going to add in not only the amount of time, but also the distance you drove through that particular area of the track as well. So that's useful if you want to be able to see, how much actual track was driven as well, which I think is a really interesting sort of analysis. I don't use it that often, but it's nice to have nonetheless. So you can click and hide that. The next one is you can choose the way the times are computed. So if I click there, I've got three options that are available to me. Right now, we have the absolute time of each and every split. But if I did this one, split time versus the best overall, you can see the fastest was here and the slowest was here. But what was the delta in terms of that particular segment versus this fastest particular point? So it gives you an idea in terms of saying, how much faster or slower was I than the actual fastest segment that I did? And it's a nice way of being able to look at it. But again, it's user preference at this point. Then you can do this one, which I actually generally tend to enjoy as well, which allows you to be able to see sort of like the cumulative effect of each of the splits. And then if I click here, I'm going to go back to absolute time. I'm going to go to the one which adds them up as we go. And so which one?
I think it's the next icon.
It's the next icon, which is, you see, this is why I need them to be able to see, because sometimes they move.
Exactly.
Which is there. Why do they get this person in to do the demos? I have no idea.
That's all good.
It's dreadful in terms of describing what's going on. So the next one over, it gives us the opportunity of being able to see exactly what Roger was just discussing, which was we can do cumulative or we can do fractional. So right now we can see from the graphic that it is fractional, means the split time is based on the time it took you to go through each of those splits. So Stavilo took me 13.952 seconds on that particular lap, and the Blanchiment took me 9.006 seconds on that lap. But you can also change it so you can see the cumulative, which means you can see as these add together, you can see the lap time progresses, and you can see that by the time you get to the end of the segment, that's your lap time. because it's added this segment, this segment, this segment as you've gone through to be able to give you that effective sort of, it adds each of the segments up to your ultimate lap time going through. And so you can see, for example, this lap, I was, effectively 5 seconds further along the track than I was at this particular point. And so it's nice to be able to get that view. But again, I'm going to go back to the fractional because that's the one that I personally like. And remember, a lot of these are set based on who you are. Now, one of the things that I haven't mentioned as we've been going through this is this practiced discipline of saving your work as you go. And I don't know how many other people sort of belabor this point, but if you ever change anything on your profile, just click on your icon here. And I've got the profiles open called iRacing Driver Analysis. And I'm just going to click Save Profile. So if I've changed anything along the way, I want to be able to save my work to make sure that I don't change 10 things and then turn off the file and then reload it and find that I've lost all the work that I've just done. And that applies to a lot of these customizations that we do with the split times report. Now, the next thing that we have across the top is that we have the statistics for every split. And this is where we start getting into, well, what does this yellowy bit mean here? And how do I find out some additional information? Love this one. So right now I've got it on hide split statistics. And you can see I've got it on hide because this icon matches this icon. But if I click here, now I can see all of that information combined together, and it gets you those 3 lap times that I was talking about, plus some additional information that's here, which is your average value, median value, my favorite, which is the best theoretical. This is the motivator for me. If I've broken the track down into segments and I haven't put a good lap time in because I feel like, I didn't put together the best lap. All of us as racers feel that way, which is like, there's a Miata driver on here, so I won't say it, but there was a in the way or something like that. Nowadays, it's like if I were a Formula 3 driver, they'd say, oh, there's a Formula Ford in the way, which is totally what we've seen in some of my demos before. But generally speaking, you're in a scenario where there was like a smooth, slow moving traffic, or, there was a bird on the track, which, believe you me, if you're out and live in the Pacific Northwest, we've started races at Portland International Raceway, where the first lap of the first day, you're driving around the corner and they're the geese that are all over the track. And so you're like, well, that's a fun experience right there. And so, there's always a reason and an excuse as to why that's there. So it's nice to have that theoretical lap to be able to say, this is what's in me to be able to do. And I think that's why a lot of people use this. But it's nice to be able to look at certain key aspects. These yellow lines here all line up to match what your best rolling lap would have been. So, this was the best actual lap that I drove. This is the best rolling lap piecing together the segments. And this is the best theoretical lap that I would have had. And so this is one of the primary uses that I use it for, and a lot of people do. But it's not the only one, because now we want to get into the other fun parts of analyzing the data as well. This I love as well, the standard deviation that shows you what the split is amongst this, the segments, and where you've got very small amounts of deviation, like this straight here. Because clearly I'm gifted at driving in a straight line. There's not much to focus on there, but then we get into the camel straight, which is following Eau Rouge, which clearly I've been flat, so I have no idea why this is inconsistent. There's half a second variant that we need to be able to work on. And so there's a lot to be able to think about in terms of different ways of looking at the data. We're going to get into that analysis in a little bit more. Because then we get into my favorite part of it, which is now we've got these ways of being able to change the report. And so if I click here, right now we're in the classic Race Studio 2 analysis channel style, which does, as we discussed, it highlights your fastest, your slowest, and your little bit of yellow that shows you best rolling. But one of the things that you can do is you can report the cells colored according to the cell's value. And so now we're starting to think, don't ignore this bit over here. I'm not talking about this yet. This is where it gets even more fun. But right now we're just talking about this particular segment here. And what this is going to do is it's going to allow you to be able to start looking at certain key aspects of consistency. And you can see all sorts of different variables that allow you to be able to understand how you're doing. Now, this is a really nice feature if you have 2 or 3 sessions available as well, because it will do this conditional formatting for the 2 or 3 sessions that you've got available at the time. For simplicity, I'm just doing 1. But what you can see is where all of the segments are green, with the exception of that one, there's relative consistency. As you can see, straight line, that's where I'm, excelling in this particular example. But at the same time, then you start getting into these areas where there's a lot of color difference. And that means there's variances in terms of the actual segment itself, which allows you to be able to see, are you being consistent or not? And so you have 2 ways of being able to look at this. The first, you can look at it based upon having the cell colored completely. The greener it is, the faster it is, You would never believe I'm English using it, the best use of English you've ever heard, which is the redder it is. But
That's
the
how I
more,
would say it.
the darker, I don't know, but the darker the red, the more, the slower it is in many respects. And it shows you that. And so that's a nice view. But you can click this one more time, and you can do a histogram type basis, which I actually think is useful when you want to be able to start looking at sort of a quick view. It makes it cleaner. I like this view because it's a bit cleaner. It's very heavy. It would color everything in. It's sort of a little bit too much for my eyes to be able to look at. Whereas this just allows you to be able to see both in color and a histogram representing this being sort of, you know, the slowest area and this being the fastest. It allows you to be able to see it that way. So it's a nice way of being able to view that data. And I think it's a much improved way of being able to analyze your overall performance. And this instance, this is the tabular format of looking at your, best way to describe it, consistency. And so you can see what we completely ignore lap one, because what I'm going to do now is if I take out lap one, which was the first lap, which, you know, I was just practicing, you know, I hadn't put my shoes on yet. It's sim racing, right? I was probably doing my slippers. But in this instance, it changes all the variables that as you move in and out and you turn on and off these laps, you'll notice that the conditional formatting changes, as do some of the variables that are down here. Now, this is a really nice feature, whereas in Race Studio 2 analysis, you would have gone to have to find lap manager and right click and disable to be able to get a fair and representative view. There's two things that you can do here. The first is you can do what I was just doing here and turning laps on and off. And the second thing you can do, which is automatic, you don't even have to do anything, which is so nice. How many of you have gone into your lap manager and disabled your out lap and your in lap because it's making your split times analysis look all weird? Well, Race Studio 3 does that automatically for you, so you don't have to worry about any of those, especially in sim racing, because my in lap was 1:19, which is remarkable, seeing as my others were 3 minutes. Which in sim racing, I just exited out of the lap, and that would have messed everything else up that's on here. So it's a nice way of being able to look at the data, and it cleans everything up. So that's this bit, which is in itself so nice to be able to have, but we haven't talked about this bit yet. So as part of the new Race Studio 3 analysis, you will get the opportunity of looking at this data in a graphical way as well. So you have these buttons across the top that allow you to be able to see certain key aspects. If I click here, you have, I've got a blank screen here and I've got a blank one here, but I can click a channel report. Now, right now on here, you'll notice that all of a sudden, we were talking about consistency. If I go back to this straight here, look how close those lines are together. It represents the fact there's hardly any standard deviation that's there. It shows the straight line that is here. It just shows that I'm super consistent in a straight line, which is, you know, super important. But at the same time, if I click on something like, well, let's, you know, this one, Stavilo, which this is, you know, very important corner, especially here getting onto the straightaway, you can see that the lines are far apart. Remember earlier I was talking about that noise aspect that Roger taught me years ago. This is helping me understand not only am I seeing inconsistency here in this particular graph, but I'm also seeing it here as relates to these. Now you may be wondering, well, hold on, why is that colored? And I'll get to that in a minute because you can change those bits of that particular view as well. But I want to talk through some of the other aspects as well. So the next thing you can do is by the splits that you're clicking on, you have this time button. So if I click here, I can hide the time, or I can show the time that is here. And what this will do is it will show me each of the laps, and it will show me the time through that segment. So I can see, you know, if this were an absolute flat line here, that would be consistent. If it's jaggedy, it's another way of looking at consistency. Same thing exists here with distance. If I click on hide the distance and show the distance, I also get that particular view that is here as well, which shows me how far or how short a distance I've traveled. Now, one of the things that we often say is that the shortest distance driven is often the fastest, but that may not necessarily always be the case because you might be binding the car up, so to speak. But it's another way of being able to look at the analysis in terms of being able to say, did I drive the longest way, but was the longest or the shortest way around the track necessarily the fastest or the slowest? So it's a nice way of being able to look at that data. There is another one on here, which is time versus distance. And so it's off right now, I can add it. I must say it's a bit of a scatter plot for me. It sort of basically says, what is the time of the lap versus the distance that is traveled? But I'm personally not using this one very much. I don't find it as easy to use, but some people might love that sort of scattered approach in terms of looking at it.
And it's just that segment, though. It's not even the whole lap. All of that data you're looking at is just from that segment.
Yeah, in terms of just distance. All over the place.
Yeah.
And so again, probably the reason I don't want to look at it is I'm inconsistent. So that graph looks like, ugh. If that graph, that looks like a lovely graph. Maybe I'm driving better. You never know, but it's one of those things.
It's only 40 feet, though. If you look at the numbers, it's really only 40 feet.
Yeah, it really isn't a huge amount of distance that is there.
Auto scales.
I feel like Roger's trying to gee me along here. Like, no, you're doing just fine through there. There's no wrong there. But it is an interesting sort of analysis nonetheless. But again, user preference, use what you love using, and it's one that I haven't used quite so much. Now, one of the things you may be saying is, well, before I even get down to the fact we also have a map here, is that you also have this button, which we haven't clicked on. Now, this just allows you to color the scale according to one view, and so this just shows you each of the laps as you go, or you can actually just colorize it. If you want to be able to see that variance in terms of these sort of colors here represented here, which I also quite like in many respects, because it also highlights in bold the fastest way through that segment. It allows you to be able to say, oh, that's what happened there. And it's a bit of one of those moments where you could do a lot of this with maybe the track report. You could do some of this with the time distance, but here it's just a lovely way of being able to quickly look at the consistency that you have through that corner. So for me personally, I don't use this one, and I shrink this one down a little bit. And then, by the way, I just need to make sure I remember this profile because I actually use this one. And then you can see a little bit of a better view here. And these are the ones that I generally tend to use here. Now, the last thing that you have as default in the split times report, this is before you've added anything else that you want to be able to work with, is you also get this lovely view of the actual lap driven and the segment and the line taken. So this represents each of the areas that you're on. So you can shrink it down and you can say, oh, this is where I'm going through here. What do my laps look like? You can see the line as it varies. You can see the consistency. This particular corner is a fun one. Pour on, if you've ever done it in sim racing or in real life, look at the inconsistency through there. I mean, honestly, I should be ashamed of myself in terms of what it is, but you can see that it just gives you an idea where on track, what kind of corner it is, what your lap time's doing. And I just love this particular view to be able to see this. And this then goes back to the exact same thing that you may have learned before as to how to be able to manage your track map type of solution. And you can use this exactly as you would do any other. So I'm not going to get in the track map detail because I know we're sort of coming up on time, maybe get some questions in as well. But this for me is effectively the split times report capability, because what I would now do is if I were analyzing this performance, the first thing I'd do is probably cheer myself up with best theoretical lap. Can backfire though if the best lap driven is also the best theoretical. You're like, oh, unless it's the pole lap and you're like, I couldn't have done anything better. But which of course you can, but in many respects that's a rare instance for me. But that just gives you the motivation to be able to look. And then the next thing I start to look at, typically me graphically, I look down a tabular form first. I look for where these are wide apart. I'm like, okay. Well, they're all pretty bad, to be honest. I probably ignore this one, probably ignore this one, but focus here, here, here. And then I click on that and I look at what's happening in terms of consistency, where that is on track. And then I probably start looking at some of the laps in time distance to be able to then start looking at certain variables as to what I'm doing as a driver. So here, for example, I could see, this is Brussels. In terms of corner, and I can look at that and I'm like, okay, well, best lap was, the 9th lap, and the worst lap was the first lap. So I could go to here, go to laps, I could do the last lap, I could do the first lap. Well, first lap's always going to be terrible, but let's just put that there anyway. And because I've highlighted here on the split times here, when I go back to my time distance, that's highlighted. Now I can look at what I'm doing in terms of driving performance. And the reason I've got a different performance is that for some reason I applied the brake here. And that's probably because I was running out of road. Which was I running out of road? Yep, probably looking at that point of view. So you can see how you can start feeding these all together. And by creating those splits or segments, it allows you to be able to link together all of the different aspects of your performance. And if you're sitting here thinking, well, that seems, quite advanced. This is available for everyone. There isn't an AIM device that exists, and even the older devices as well, that doesn't give you all of the data that you can use to be able to work on this.
It's funny you tied those two together. The split times report, which we're talking about today, over to the time distance, because you're really trying to do three things we always talk about. What happened, where did it happen, and why did it happen, right? You went for the first two, you got those pretty easily here. And then you said, okay, I really want to know what my throttle was and brake. So boom, you just clicked on the time distance tab. You were in that segment already, and boom, you within a half a second you had the knowledge of what you needed to know. Could have then jumped right back to the split report and continued on to the next segment.
Totally agree, Roger. And there's another one as well, which you can also do, is you can also get into the track, and you can see that segment that also have your track. Now, any of the ones you've set up, there's other views, but you can also see that here from the track analysis as well, that allows you to be able to look at different views. So right here,
exactly,
I've got split times. I can also add distance if I wanted to. But what if I wanted to be able to add in certain other variables in that particular segment? Well, I go to the track map, and here I can add in, which I've got minimum and maximum speed through here. I can see what my minimum speeds and my maximum speeds were through here to be able to see, interestingly, my minimum speeds was one of the slowest coming through this particular corner. And maximum speed, but it was also my fastest through there. So then we get into the, well, was it a line situation? What did I do differently? And those sort of aspects as well. So you can get into a different type of analysis, all set fundamentally at the beginning by making sure you determined what you wanted your segments to be able to analyze the data for how you wanted it. And so I could go on for ages and about how much I love this type of stuff, but I think at this point, Roger, probably best to hand back over to you and sort of look at some Q&A.
Let's do that, but you stay there for a second, because there's a couple of questions that we have that may want you to point at something in the data. A couple of them. The first one, I don't think, John asks, I would like to be able to see the theoretical lap in the split in the measures graph. What's pretty cool about this software is, even if you wanted to see and don't do this now, James, it just take a little extra time, but you could add the time distance graph right below your split report by right clicking and saying adding a panel, and boom, you could add that in. So you would be able to add in the things that you want to this to get what you're after, or add the split report into a time distance plot. So you just don't have a channel selected right now.
Exactly.
It's the only reason it didn't show up. But the all pretty easy stuff. So that's easy enough to do. This one I don't have an answer for, although I thought it worked fine. Ben asks, in Ray Studio 2, I could get a best theoretical using the split report across multiple sessions. I thought it did work that way, Ben. I will test that out. I thought you could bring up multiple tests and get it all. Okay, it hasn't yet. Perfect.
It hasn't yet. It's one of my requests as well. The best theoretical across the best sectors was something that I used to be able to have sort of this, but for all three segments that were there. So very good question. One that I also would very much like.
Right now, you would have to go up and hit the two different tabs across the top, and you would open up each individual test and get it, but they're not on one page. Okay, perfect. I should read your emails closer when you're sending them. James is always nice and CCs me with notes that he sends in. Mark mentions, basically, telemetry. Can Ray Studio 3 be used during the session instead of after the session? We do have no ability to do any type of real-time telemetry or do it while the session is going. So Mark, we can't do that yet. So Tice, time distance is combined of the two above. I think he was focusing on something we were doing before. And good, once you realize it's the same info. Jumping back and forth, it's the same exact segments. It's that we could add that time distance plot in there as he mentions, as Tice mentioned. Kyle says the same thing. Is it possible to, down below, when you hover over the map, is it possible to reduce the width of that yellow line? I believe it is. If you were to click on the little line function right there, it's set up to 2 by default. You could set that to a little bit thinner. But that wider line actually isn't so bad, because when you zoom in to really look at it, the line width stays the same, the map gets bigger, and it's not so bad. So yeah, it looks a little bit funny when you're zoomed way out, but I think it's an okay line width by default when you zoom into the map. Okay, and the last one that Kyle has here, should note the splits on the segment in the time distance reflects the list on the split times report. I don't understand that one fully. The splits on the of the segment in the time distance reflects the list on the split report. Uh, the top there across the top, it's the same exact segments, so it should reflect, yes.
Yeah. It
I
is.
would think
These will be the same by. This is where you determine your distance as you set your splits.
by dragging and dropping that. Don't
Yeah,
want to do that now
exactly.
to your own personal map, but that's how you would adjust them real quickly. And he gives a feature request that we will look at and make sure works. So you have oops, there's one more. Tice says, I didn't make myself clear. Can you show the complete lap in the split graph or only the split? Because it's a split report, the way that if you zoomed out on that map, you'd see the entire lap, but it's still going to highlight the colorization, and the highlighting is going to be on there. And other than that, you're going to see the splits themselves on the map. So if James hovered over one of them there, and then goes down to the map and zooms out, you're going to see that split, but you'll also see the red and blue and green splits of the normal split of the where you've done the splits on the rest of the track map. So, and then as you hover over each one, it zooms in. That can feel a little frustrating at times because every time you change a split, it zooms in. But that's really what you want it to do. You want it to zoom into that map so you can focus in on what you've done through that particular split. It is a split report, so not a big deal there.
There was one thing I didn't show, which I
Okay.
do want to just highlight, and it's only this one here. I know we're run out of time, but you know, this is GPS speed. You have the option of changing this to anything that you want to be able to change in terms of. So this one is actually called the channels value. So it doesn't have to be speed. Now I use speed because that's for me a great indicator of consistency. But you can change this to any of the channels that you have available to you. Now we're using iRacing data here, so I have hundreds to choose from. So in the purposes of not getting too boring, I won't, but you can change that to make it specific to what you want to be able to see. So it doesn't have to be speed. You can look at other variables that are going through here as well in relation to certain channels you want to be able to analyze.
Yeah, if it's a braking segment where you're really focused in on just braking, maybe you want brake pressure, right, instead of speed. So yeah, I agree with that, and that would be very helpful for different things. James, you talk about it a lot in the webinars you do, and some of the training videos you do. You don't be shy of clicking on some things. If you see that cogged wheel, like it shows there above that GPS speed in that upper right corner, that there's something there you might want to change. So, and you've done that a lot, and you just mentioned that we could change that from speed. So, perfect. James, I think we've got through most of the questions that I can handle at least. Thank you for unsharing that, and then let me reshare mine if I can find that button. There it is. Sometimes when you're in a hurry, right, you can't see it. There you go. Perfect. It was an hour is I always think about this, and I think an hour is going to be plenty of time for us to look at all the different functions and all of the different things and get through it all, but it ends up never being enough, right? But we had a good time. We talked a lot about the split time analysis, the split time report, and learned a lot. I learned as almost always. I learned 2 or 3 things as we either prepare or go through these things, and I did it again today. So perfect. Again, we mentioned a couple of times some links that are available for you if you're watching this later on YouTube, where all of our YouTube videos go. Currently, I think there's 205 of them up there. This will be number 206, and go there, take a look at it. All of the videos will be there, and in the description is all of the information that we talked about being linked, plus more will be in the description box. So customer support, boy, it's that time of year. Here we are at the end of April. The entire country here in the States is up and racing, and I know we're out there running around as fast as we can, going to different events, and all of our AIM tech staff is out there events. If you see them out there, say hi to them and ask them any questions you need at that point. If you don't see somebody at the event, we can only cover so many, obviously, but give us a call. We have a support line. The 800-718-9090 is our AIM support line. Give us a call if you have any questions at all. What's next? It's not the last one that we're going to do of these. We've got this histogram one that we're going to be doing with Matt Romanowski next weekend. Histograms is another favorite function of many people, and there's been a bunch of added functionality to the histogram function. So we're going to talk a lot about that. I know Matt is already preparing for it. And so a week from today, we'll have Matt here and we'll talk all about the histogram function. That'll be a good time. Looking forward to that. Here's some of the ones we've done with the focused on the functions themselves. All the way through. There's links that, again, this exact bit of information is linked in all of these different YouTube videos, where you can jump between them all just by going into the description and be able to click on them and jump from function to function today. And then we're going to have histogram next week, as I just mentioned. Then we're going to go back and we're going to talk about the opening database, where there's been a few little changes here and there in there. We kind of started with one about that a little bit a month or two ago, and then we're going to end with that with a real focused, in-depth version of what that can do for you and the power of that. And then we're going to talk about math channels, something I don't have added on here yet. We're going to talk about math channels, and then we're going to get back into doing some data analysis functionality with RayStudio 3, and some training on specific use of these specific functions that we've covered on the how-tos. So looking forward to that. The contact information, as we kind of close this one out, we've probably created a few questions. Hopefully we've answered more than we've created, but we always create some. There's an email address for both James and myself. Make it easy for you to get a hold of us. If you have any other questions about split reports or other things, just drop us an email. I know James has been extremely helpful, and he handles a lot of email questions from all around the world, and appreciate that as well. Every once in a while he'll get one and he say, well, Roger might be a better person for this one for you, or something, and I'm happy to take some of those as well. So it's all good. I appreciate it, James. Anything else you'd like to kind of add on as we kind of close this one out?
No, I'd just say thank you very much again for having me. It's always lovely to do these. And yeah, I look forward to watching the next one, and hopefully sometime in the future presenting with you again, because I very much appreciate the opportunity.
Absolutely. And James has he's got his racing website, jamescolborn.com. He's got a YouTube page. It's linked here in the chat box. It'll be linked down below. He's got, gosh, what is it, 30 or 40 videos, something like that, James, where you've done small snippets all the way to hour-long webinars. Just tons of information there for everybody. So check out that YouTube page and James's website. Very, very helpful. I get questions sometimes, and if I don't have a video we've done, when we can't cover them all, I often will I'll take that person's question and say, well, here, go watch this, starting at this minute, and take a look at the way James explained it. I think you'll get your answer. So very, very helpful, James. We appreciate you doing those very much. Perfect. I appreciate everybody. Thanks, everybody, for coming. Looking forward to seeing everybody here next week for histograms. Talk to you next week.